Hey guys, it's Chris. From surviving a decapitation to the skydiver who nearly got taken out by a meteorite, here are 10 of the luckiest people in the world. Number 10. Surviving Final Destination. Our first story looks something like what would have happened in a Final Destination movie. At 2 p.m. on a seemingly normal Friday, a man was minding his own business, driving his BMW SUV when a giant steel beam pierced the windshield of his car. This definitely looks like something that only ever happens in the movies, but it was definitely real life. According to what the San Jose firefighter said, if the beam had been just 2 inches to the right, the driver of the BMW would have also been impaled. And this is no small metal beam either. It literally smashed the whole windshield. It looks like a giant piece of scaffolding. Apparently, the metal beam fell off the back of a truck, bounced off the road, and struck the BMW's windshield, much to the driver's surprise. The guy managed to keep his cool and pull the car over to the side of the road, where he then checked himself only to find a few minor scratches on his arm. Talk about being one of the luckiest people ever. It's like reaching into a haystack and immediately finding the needle. Number 9. 4 times Lotto Winner. Our next lucky person didn't cheat death, she cheated the lottery. Meet Joan Ginther, the woman who won the lottery 4 times. She used a strategy that involved purchasing thousands and thousands of lottery tickets, but it did end up paying off for her in the end. She won $5.4 million in 1993, $2 million in 2006, $3 million in 2008, and finally $10 million in 2010. But what's really interesting is that she didn't choose the numbers. She won all of these prizes on scratch tickets. That's what makes her seem like the luckiest lotto winner in the world. And while a lot of people have tried to pick apart her strategy, saying that she's addicted to gambling or that she's playing the odds, there's no denying that she's ridiculously lucky. Even if her initial lottery win back in 1993 set her up with enough money to buy ridiculous amounts of lottery scratch-and-win cards for the next decade, it doesn't mean she would automatically win. She still had to get extremely lucky to win millions pretty much every other year. Yes, she purchased thousands of tickets to do it, but now she's super rich. Number 8. Plane crash survivor. Juliane Koepcke is definitely one of the luckiest people on the planet. On Christmas Eve in 1971, Julianne was flying over the Peruvian rainforest with her mom when their plane was struck by lightning. There was a bright flash of light, the plane dipped and then began to plummet. The lights were out, everyone was screaming, and suddenly Julianne was outside of the airplane, free-falling towards the ground while still strapped into her seat. She apparently saw the jungle coming closer and closer, and then she lost consciousness. She later learned that the plane had snapped in half 2 miles above the ground and that she fell the rest of the way. Miraculously, she wasn't dead. She'd broken her collarbone and had some other cuts, but her injuries weren't serious. However, she was alone and lost in the Peruvian jungle. Luckily, Julianne had lived in the jungle for 1.5 years before taking the airplane, so she kinda knew how to get around. She found a creek, used it for fresh drinking water, and then hunkered down and waited to be saved. But on the 4th day, she began to see passengers floating down the creek from the plane wreckage, which was obviously terrifying for a young girl alone in the jungle. It ended up being 10 days before she found another person, and by then had a wound on her right arm that was infested with maggots. Despite all the horror, she was eventually saved and brought back to civilization. Unfortunately, she never saw her mother again. Number 7. Cheating death twice. The Dutch cyclist Martin de Jong has cheated death twice. He didn't survive falling out of an airplane, but he did avoid getting on 2 airplanes that were destroyed. He allegedly changed his flight for both Malaysia Airlines MH17 and Malaysia Airlines MH370. Both these airplanes were involved in horrible disasters over the course of just 4 months, and he was supposed to be on both of them, but changed his mind at the last minute. This guy had been traveling around the world competing as part of a cycling team, and his flight changes were prompted by a way to save money. This includes changing his plans for Flight MH17, which was shot down over the Ukraine, killing just about all of the 300 passengers on board. What's even more remarkable is that he did the same thing with MH370, the famous Malaysian jet that vanished and has yet to be found. Most people believe the jet is somewhere in the Indian Ocean, but it has literally never been found and is one of the most confusing aviation mysteries in recent years. What's even more freaky is that while speaking to news reporters, the cyclist said that he met someone waiting to board MH370, and this person has not been seen since the incident. That feels like the equivalent of talking to a ghost. Of course, the cyclist did say that what happened on both flights was terrible and a horrible thing, and after giving his story, he said he will not talk to any more news sources out of respect for the dead and the grieving. Still, that is one lucky cyclist. Number 6. 17 days trapped. It's hard to say if the woman in our next story is lucky or simply tough as nails. When a garment factory in Dhaka collapsed in 2013 and killed over 1,100 people, one teenage girl defied all odds. Her name is Reshma Begum, and at the time she was 19 years old and a seamstress working in the building. When it collapsed, she spent 17 days stuck underneath the rubble. She actually survived by drinking rainwater and foraging for food from lunch boxes that she found amongst the debris. And while it's lucky enough that she survived the horrible incident that killed most of her co-workers, it's even more impressive that she survived in such hostile conditions until she was eventually rescued. While we won't get into the specifics of the horrifying accident, basically caused by a fashion retailer's disregard for human life, cutting costs by using a sweatshop in Bangladesh, I can say that after the young girl was released from the hospital, she managed to get a better job at a luxury hotel. Rather than making $60 a month at the sweatshop, hopefully now she'll be making a little more, and she won't have to worry about the building falling down on her head. Number 5. The luckiest man in the entire universe. Now it's time to talk about perhaps the luckiest man in the world. This guy died, came back to life, and then won the lottery twice. That kind of thing just kinda doesn't happen. But back in 1999, Bill Morgan was a truck driver in Australia. He got in a very horrible accident at work, but he survived. However, the medication he was given after the accident resulted in him having an allergic reaction, which then caused his heart to stop. Bill was clinically dead for 14 minutes. But then finally, they got his heart pumping again and they brought Bill back to life. And that's pretty lucky as it is. But it's what happened next that makes Bill the luckiest man in the universe. After Bill's heart got pumping again, he was comatose for over a week. The doctors recommended twice that he be removed from life support and allowed to die. But 12 days later, he miraculously came out of his coma and was completely fine. After getting out of the hospital, Bill proposed to his girlfriend, and after she agreed to marry him, he bought a lottery scratch ticket. That ticket yielded $17,000. A local news station in Melbourne decided to do a feature on him, seeing as his story was pretty incredible. And during the interview, they asked Bill to purchase another lottery ticket and scratch it on camera as a reenactment. When he did so, he ended up winning $250,000. So come on, you tell me who's the luckiest man alive. Number 4. Lightning heals the blind. In 1980, the unbelievable happened. A 62-year-old man named Edwin E. Robinson had been blinded in a traumatic accident. But after he was struck by lightning in 1980, his vision came back, and he could see for the first time in 9 years. This sounds like something that would happen in a movie, but it definitely did happen in real life. It was at his home in Portland that he found himself with his wife trapped in a thunderstorm and seeking refuge under a poplar tree. But of course, hiding under a tree isn't really the best idea when there's lightning around. Robinson was struck by a bolt of electricity, knocked to the ground, and when he woke up later that evening, he found he could see and hear just fine. He was even examined by his doctor, who confirmed that he had regained sight and hearing. However, his doctor had no idea how the lightning could have restored his vision or his hearing. It just didn't make any sense. But nonetheless, Robinson was obviously pretty happy about it. It's not really recommended that any blind people listening to this right now go out with a metal rod and try to be struck by lightning. Just don't do it, please. Number 3. Surviving a decapitation. It's not every day that somebody survives a decapitation. Depending on which way you look at the story, this guy is either very lucky or very unfortunate. It all started when Brock Meester was born. He wasn't breathing and he was experiencing seizures. He needed CPR to be saved immediately after birth, and that's not the best way to come into the world. Then as a teen, he had to suffer chemo treatments and radiation because he had brain cancer. But these aren't the most impressive things he survived. When Brock was 22, he and his friend were sitting in his pickup truck. Brock had a few beers and his friend decided to drive. They were supposed to meet some other friends just down the road, but they never made it. The truck hit a patch of ice, the pickup slid over, and they hit a ditch, and Brock's head punched through the window. What essentially happened here is that Brock's head was sticking out of the window when the truck hit the ground, and that means that Brock's head also hit the ground. It resulted in something that shocked the doctors. The injury was known as an internal decapitation. When Brock's head hit the ground, his skull separated entirely from his spine. Luckily, he made it to the hospital in one piece and his body stabilized. And finally, Brock made a miraculous recovery. According to the report from Live Science, after wearing a neck brace and a few months of physical therapy, Brock will be just fine. Number 2. Unexpected pearl. Let's move away from horrifying injuries and take a look at one of the luckiest shoppers ever. When Terry Priest went to Tesco to purchase some oysters, she had no idea that she'd be walking out of the store with a treasure. The oyster cost only around 50 cents, but it ended up being worth over $100. That isn't a huge payday, but it's the rarity of the event that makes it so special. You see, inside one of the oysters that Terry purchased was a pearl. Not a large pearl, but definitely a pearl big enough that she managed to turn it into a ring worth over $500. The chances of a pearl slipping through quality control inside of an oyster has been estimated at about 1 million to 1. And that means you have to be one of the luckiest people in existence to find a pearl inside of your grocery store oyster. Number 1. Skydiver and a meteorite. The last story on the list for today is something out of this world, and I do mean that literally. A skydiver in Norway captured the exact moment that a meteorite shot past his head, just seconds after he deployed his parachute. This is something that has not only never been seen before by any skydiver, but also something that has never been heard of before. This was also the first time in history that a meteorite was ever filmed as its flame was going out. According to the story in Men's Journal, the skydiver was extremely lucky that the rock didn't either hit him or punch a flaming hole through his parachute. You can actually find a video of this happening online, and you can see how dangerously close the meteorite was to smacking the man on his head. Imagine being murdered by a meteorite while falling out of the sky. That would make for one incredible headstone. After the incredibly close call, the skydiver and his girlfriend searched all throughout the forest area where they believed the meteorite had landed. Unfortunately, they never did find the rock. The skydiver then went to the Natural History Museum in Oslo with his video to see if someone could shed any light on what happened. And yes, all of the experts at the museum agreed that it must have been a meteorite. It likely came from an asteroid, according to experts, probably hitting the outer atmosphere of the Earth at about 5 times the velocity of a bullet before slowing down. They told the skydiver that if he had jumped a fraction of a second later, he probably would have been dead. The meteorite would have hit him with such force that he probably would have been cut clean in half. So which of these people do you think is the luckiest of them all? Let me know your thoughts, and thanks for stopping by. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe and come back soon.